a spinach and bean soup with spicy chili garlic croutons, pecorino cheese, and of course our Tuscan extra virgin olive oil. Delicious. All right, we're gonna start by chopping up all of our vegetables. So we're gonna chop 1 onion. And since we're gonna be pureeing all of this eventually, we don't need to worry too much about chopping it up super fine. Next up, we're going to peel 1 small waxy potato. So I'm using a Yukon potato here, and this is just gonna help give our soup some body as well as add a little bit of a silky texture when we go to puree it. This is a very humble soup with very simple ingredients, which I like because it reminds me of the way that many people in Tuscany cook. It's called cucina povera, which means poor cooking. And they often use very simple, very basic ingredients and make something really special out of something, again, that's just very basic. And although this dish is not necessarily traditional to Tuscany, it's definitely inspired by the region with the use of these ingredients. Things like garlic, greens, white cannellini beans. These are all ingredients that are very typical of Tuscany. And then of course, we're using our Toscano regional extra virgin olive oil. Okay, and the final thing that we're going to prep is our garlic. So we're gonna be thinly slicing 3 whole garlic cloves. We're gonna use half the cloves in the soup itself, and then the other half of the garlic slices to season our croutons. And we're slicing them instead of mincing them or finely chopping them because they are going to be cooking together with other ingredients for a little bit of time. And so I don't want them to burn too quickly. And so by having slightly bigger pieces or slices, we're going to be able to just gently brown them, get them nice and golden, infuse that flavor without burning them. For this recipe, we are using Zucchi's Toscano extra virgin olive oil, which is one of their regional blends made up of almost entirely Tuscan olive oils. So it has a really nice peppery and pungent flavor, and it also complements very nicely green leafy vegetables and garlic. So it's gonna work great in this recipe. So to begin, we're going to pour in about 2 or 3 tablespoons of the Toscano oil to start. You can just sort of eyeball it here, just enough to coat the bottom of our pot, which will just help more evenly cook everything. We'll add in our chopped onions, and we're gonna let those simmer and cook until they're nice and soft and translucent. So once the onions are nice and soft, we can go ahead and add in the potato. And we're gonna cook this just for a couple of minutes to soften them up. They'll continue cooking as we add the broth and the water. And then we will add half of our sliced garlic. So remember, the second half will be saved for our croutons. And since we're going to be pureeing all of this up, I'm not too worried about there being big chunks of garlic in our soup. It's just going to add a little bit more flavor. So you want to be careful not to let the garlic burn, so just enough to where it smells fragrant and is a little bit brown. So this is really the base that's going to flavor the rest of the soup. And once we've built that flavor in, we can go ahead and add in everything else. So we're gonna add in about 4 cups of vegetable stock. Also add in 1 cup of water. We're gonna let this come to a simmer and let the potatoes cook all the way through. We're also going to add in a leftover Parmesan cheese rind. And this is a very typical Italian thing to do, is to, throw in your cheese rind. It'll add some flavoring to the soup, add a little bit of salty flavor, and it's a great way to not waste this rind. Again, we're talking about cucina povera, poor cooking, so we're using every last bit, not wasting anything. So while our soup is cooking, we can prepare the topping, which is going to be a chili garlic crouton. We're gonna take about half of a baguette, or really any loaf of bread that you like. An Italian bread would also work well here. And we're going to cut this up into cubes. This is going to act as a nice crunchy topping on top of our soup and add just a little bit of a spicy garlic flavor. I always like having a nice crunchy topping on top of my soups and my pastas because it just adds that dimension of texture, especially when you're working with something like a pureed soup, which is already really smooth. It's really nice to have that nice crunchy texture on top. To prepare our croutons, we're going to add in a few more tablespoons of our Toscano EVOO, and then we're going to toast the bread cubes until they're nice and golden brown and crunchy. I love the smell of this olive oil. You can smell that green leafy smell. It's very herbaceous. We're gonna add in our cubed bread here. We just wanna make sure that the entire bottom surface of each piece of bread is in the oil so that it really toasts evenly. And we're gonna let these set for a few minutes undisturbed to allow that color to develop. This is a great way to use up leftover stale bread as well, going back to that waste nothing attitude that many Italians have. So I'm using up the remaining sliced scarlet cloves that we cut up before. And again, we're adding these in at the last minute so that they don't burn. And then we'll add in about 3/4 of a teaspoon of dried chili flakes. You could add in more or less depending on your tolerance and appetite for spice. And then finally, a little bit of salt. You can always add more later. This is important because we do want this to have a nice salty flavor on top of our soup. And I do want to give our chili flakes and our garlic a chance to infuse that flavor into everything. And we can just toss to coat and really flavor all of our croutons. And we'll cook this just for a minute, just enough until it's nice and fragrant. I think that's perfect. We'll turn this off heat and set it aside until we're ready to serve our soup. Our soup has been simmering and the potatoes are nice and soft, so now we can move on to adding in our spinach and everything else. First thing I'm gonna do is remove our Parmesan rind, which has been simmering away and adding lots of nice flavor to our soup. I'm gonna remove it since we're going to be pureeing this soup together. I don't want to puree this in there. And then next we can add in our spinach. So we're using about 6 to 8 cups of spinach here. We're gonna let this cook down. I'm adding these in close to when we're going to be serving the soup because I do want to maintain the nice green color. So I don't want to add these in too early and have them turn brown. I want that nice vibrant color in my soup. So the next part is we will add in our beans just to add a little bit more depth of texture in our soup. Once the spinach is wilted down, we can go ahead and puree the soup together. Again, we want to maintain that nice vibrant color, so we're going to do this fairly quickly after adding the spinach. So I'm going to take an immersion blender here and place it all the way down to the bottom of the pot. You also want to make sure that the heat is turned down low or turned off because we don't want our soup to start boiling and simmering while we're using the immersion blender. Now, if you don't have an immersion blender, you could absolutely do this in a food processor or just a regular blender, but I find that it's quite easy just to be able to put this in, blend it up, rather than transfer the soup out, wait for it to cool, blend it up, and then add it back to the pot. So this can come in handy, just saves you an extra step. The last thing we're gonna do is season with salt and pepper to taste. So add in just a little bit of salt to get started, and then we can always add more, and a few cracks of fresh pepper. We'll stir this up, and let's just give it a little taste to see if it needs anything else. I think it's good. I may add just a little bit more pepper because the pepper goes really nicely with the olive oil, which is a little bit peppery. So the final step is to serve up our soup. So we're gonna ladle in our soup into our bowls, and then we'll add on our chili garlic croutons, a little bit of pecorino cheese, of course, a little drizzle of the Toscano EVOO to finish. This is a lot like a cream of spinach soup, except Italianized a little bit. There's garlic, There's chili flakes, there's olive oil, there's delicious crunchy croutons on top. I love the crunch that the croutons add. And that little bit of olive oil to finish the dish really adds a nice peppery punch to the whole thing. Delicious.